When you see medical information, how do you know if it's true or just hype? You're often told to do your own research, but how?
I'm Dr.Vickie Petz Kasper. I practiced obstetrics and gynecology for 20 years until I landed on the other side of the sheets as a very sick patient. When my own body betrayed me, I took a handful of pills to manage my disease and another handful to counteract the side effects. My health was out of control. Through surgery, medications, and lots of prayers, I regained my strength only to face another diagnosis. My doctor challenged me to make radical changes through lifestyle medicine. Now I feel great and I want to help you make changes that make a difference. Healthy Looks Great on You podcast takes you to many medical schools so you can learn the power of lifestyle medicine. If you're ready to take control of your health, you're in the right place. Whether you're focused on prevention or you're trying to manage a condition, I'll give you practical steps to start your own journey toward better health, because healthy looks great on you.
This is episode 166, How to Do Your Own Research. 5 years ago, the world shut down, and I remember that day so clearly. I called my mother and I said, "Where are you?" And she was getting a mammogram, and I said, "Go home and stay home." For the next several weeks, I worked from home, visited with my friends outside and distanced, and we wore a mask in public. I even hosted my family for Thanksgiving outside on the deck. Honestly, it was one of the most memorable Thanksgivings ever. I used the china, tablecloths, and I even moved the dining room chairs outside. Fortunately, the weather was perfect. But was all that really necessary? People started asking questions and coming up with their own answers. I've wanted to do this episode for a long time, but it's not about COVID. We'll get to that later. But this is the time in history when people were encouraged to start doing their own medical research. However, to my knowledge, nobody's giving you instructions on how. And listen, before we get started, you know I love you, right? Seriously, I love people and I love helping people learn to optimize their health through evidence-based lifestyle medicine. And if anything I say offends you, let's talk about it. You can email me at drvickie@healthylooksgreatonyou.com and I'll schedule a call with you. I will not, however, engage with anyone on social media. That's just not a good way to have a conversation. We should do it in person. But if you've listened to this podcast before, you know we're going to mini medical school to learn how to do your own research. But I suppose that only equips you to do mini research, right? On top of that, there are a lot of prereqs for medical school classes like statistics and basic biology. So let's start there with a couple of definitions. In vivo versus in vitro. I bet you didn't see that coming, but stick with me. This is important. In vitro refers to in the lab, either in a test tube or a petri dish. In vivo refers to a living organism. And you need to understand that humans are unique. What affects a jellyfish may not affect a dog the same way. And what affects a monkey may not have the same effects on your brother, even if he acts like one sometimes. So when doing your own research, it's important to understand where the experiment took place. For example, I recently saw someone touting the benefits of an old drug that we used to use for bladder cancer until better treatments were developed. When I looked at the source, the studies were done on mouse melanoma cells from the lab. In other words, they gave a mouse cancer, took the cancer cells out, mixed them in a dish with this drug, and voila, the cancer cells died. Okay, if I need something to kill mouse cancer cells in a petri dish, please sign me up, but you get the picture? Now, I mentioned that I looked at the source, and if you hear me say one thing today, it's look at the source. Always, you should look at the source. And it's also important to talk about the pace of science. As studies are done, new information becomes available and recommendations may change. And if you listen to the end of my podcast, I say that at the end of every episode. And listen, I do a ton of research for every one of these episodes. It takes me hours and hours longer than the writing, recording, editing, and publishing. But that still doesn't mean a new study won't come out tomorrow and make the information that I'm sharing outdated. So if you're going to do your own research, you got to keep up and make sure there's not a more current, better designed study that suggests something different. Let me put it like this. About a year and a half ago, I moved away from the town where I had lived for 28 years. And the whole entire time I lived there, there was this big red brick building right there on Main Street. Now, I hadn't been back in a while, but the other day I went, and lo and behold, to my surprise, when I drove down Main Street, that building was white. Now, if I hadn't been there recently, I would believe with all my heart that there was a big red brick building on Main Street. But things change. And if you look at a study that's 5 years old, you need to understand that 5 years is a really long time in the world of science and research. We may have learned a lot of new information since then. Things change. So keep that in mind when you're doing your own research. Now, I've been talking about sources, and I'll keep doing it, but here's the deal. I see a lot of information shared without any source, medical and otherwise. No source. Just a so-called fact, and people share it like it's the gospel truth. Can I be frank? I see a lot of my friends share misinformation. How do I know it's misinformation? Because I am a big-time skeptic, and I don't take anything at face value, and neither should you. But if you're going to share something, especially medical advice, please be sure it's credible and not just something that matches your bias. Yes, bias is another term we need to understand because I promise it affects you, me, and the scientist doing the research. So let's talk about the scientist first. I'm going to call her Dr. Ink, and she believes with all of her heart that writing with blue ink causes your hair to fall out. I mean, she is convinced it's true. So she starts asking people who suffer hair loss, did you use a blue ink pen before your hair fell out? Now, here's what typically happens. People who suffer hair loss and used black ink, they just kind of move on. But those bald people who used blue ink raised their hand, me. See, Dr. Ink was right. Blue ink causes hair loss. Now, I know that's a ridiculous example, but seriously, bias is huge in research. You see, what Dr. Ink should have done is a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial because that is the gold standard in research. A well-designed study would look at people randomly, not just those you select out because either they have hair loss or they used blue ink. It creates bias. And Dr. Ink needs to use invisible ink so that she's blind to who used blue ink versus who used black ink. But Dr. Ink has decided that she's really onto something in her practice because every single person who has hair loss used blue ink. So she decides to go against the grain and share that information. We call that anecdotal evidence, or as my professor used to say, you are unencumbered by data. Because here's the deal. Even if Dr. Ink sees thousands of patients, in the grand scheme of things, she does not have data. And speaking of data, we need to talk about some statistical terms. I'll let you do your own research so that you better understand things like confidence intervals, which is the range of values within which we are confident that a true effect exists. For example, if a study finds a treatment has an effect size of 0.5 with a 95% confidence interval of 0.2 to 0.8, this tells you with 95% confidence the true effect size is between 0.2 and 0.8. Got it? Okay, bottom line, a more narrow confidence interval suggests more accuracy. But seriously, if you've ever read a medical study, they talk this way. So if you're going to do your own research, you really do need to understand statistics. You'll need to understand p-values, which tells you if a result is statistically significant. Very generally speaking, a p-value should be below 0.05. But even that doesn't mean that there's practical significance. So when you look at a p-value, ask yourself if it even really matters. Class isn't over yet. Let's talk about the power of a meta-analysis. And I'm not talking about Meta, the Facebook platform. That could get me censored. I'm talking about combining lots of smaller studies from multiple different sources so that the statistical power is increased and bias is decreased. They aren't perfect, and they don't even prove causality, and that's our next term. Just because someone used blue ink and their hair fell out doesn't mean the blue ink caused their hair to fall out. Remember that. Okay, now that class is over, we need to go to the lab, and I'm talking about the other meta, and that is Facebook or your social media platform of choice. And listen, I'll be honest, I am grieved. Because you can say what you want about doctors, but I have been around a lot of doctors my whole adult life. And with a few exceptions, nearly all of them are trustworthy and care so deeply about their patients. But somewhere along the way, their expertise has been replaced. And hold on, just hear me out, because there are some real world examples. One of my Facebook friends, and I don't even remember who, shared something medical from someone I will not name because I don't even know her. But I did investigate a little bit because the claim she was making was clearly erroneous and it was being shared widely. Here's what I found. She has 458 Facebook friends and describes herself as a wife and mother with a green thumb. But wait, there's more. She's a biohacker, always learning, and claims, I can help you be healthy. Hey, that's my gig. But her previous jobs included food and beverage manager at a major hotel chain, as well as a casino worker. She's giving widely shared medical advice. And I didn't even know what a biohacker was, so I did my own research and Googled it. It's do-it-yourself biology. But she wasn't sharing biology. She was sharing blatant medical advice, albeit incorrect, everything from vaccines to cancer treatment. So next time you see anything that's medical advice, check the source. No source? Then don't share it. Okay, if you haven't hung up on me yet, let's keep going and talk about cough CPR. I mean, you want to help someone, right? If they're home alone and they're having a heart attack, they should cough. This started circulating social media in 1999, and I guess Facebook kept coughing because recently it was resurrected. And listen, it's not true. And here's why it matters. If you're having a heart attack and you're home alone, you should dial 911 and take an aspirin. And if you're telling people to cough because you think it could help, I want you to think about this. Could it hurt? Is it true? Do your own research and check your source. Let me say that louder. Check your source. I did, and here's another one. I saw someone share a post that was later edited to say they weren't giving medical advice, and they encouraged people to do their own research and come to their own conclusion. But then they proceeded to talk about how something in particular is a cure for everything, from cancer to COVID, high cholesterol, diabetes. It's an antimicrobial agent against bacteria and viruses. It increases your immunity, protects you from heart disease. It's anti-inflammatory, and it treats autoimmune diseases, and get this, with no side effects. Now let me ask you a question. If there's really a drug that can do all of that, then why has Big Pharma not snatched it up off the shelves, patented it, and made buckets of money from it? That's a serious question. So I checked the source. The person not giving medical advice has studied at a university and owns not one but two businesses. One is an engraving business and the other is a handyman business. I mean, you probably wouldn't listen to me about how to fix the hinges on your doors, but that ought to be a two-way street. And if you need something engraved, you're probably not going to go see a doctor. But what if it's credible? You know, like a well-known TV doctor. Here's a post that's been going around for years. On Wednesday, which Wednesday, who knows because there's no source, Dr. So-and-so, and I'm not even going to say the name, had a show on the fastest growing cancer in women, thyroid cancer. And they said there was something called a thyroid guard that should be used during mammograms. And the post goes on to say, by coincidence, I had my yearly mammogram yesterday and I felt a little silly, but I asked about the guard. And sure enough, the technician had one in a drawer and I asked why it wasn't routinely used. Answer, I don't know. You have to ask for it. Well, if I hadn't seen the show, how would I have known to ask? Someone was nice enough to forward this to me. I hope you pass it on to your friends and family. Well, apparently a lot of people did that. Now, first of all, this one started in 2010. Second of all, Dr. So-and-so really only discussed dental x-rays, not mammograms, in that particular episode. Why does it matter? I don't know. Do you think the truth matters? Do you think credibility matters? And to my fellow followers of Jesus, remember what Paul said to the Philippians, whatever is true. I'm just asking you to push pause before you post. Do your own research, check the source, and if there is no source, keep scrolling unless you can verify it's true. I think it's time we had some straight talk about facts in medicine. And I may wade into some controversial waters, but there is one thing that's really being promoted right now is the cure-all for everything. And one of my Facebook friends is passionate about this and posts all kinds of sources that look very credible. They vary in age from 2015 to 2022. Some of them are in mice, some are in vitro, and there are a few case studies. You know what a case study is, right? It's a single circumstance that happened and got reported in the literature. For example, someone got a wart on their finger and they put baking powder on it and the wart went away. So someone writes a paper about it so that everyone knows that this one time, this one thing happened. Now, if I get a wart on my finger, I'm going to use one of those little Band-Aid thingies, and if that doesn't work, I'm going to the dermatologist and having it frozen off with liquid nitrogen, even though somebody somewhere put baking soda on their wart and it went away. Now, please don't think I'm being snarky. I want you to think critically, because if you're going to do your own research, you need to be aware it's complicated. Harvard Medical School calls it the wild, wild west of online cancer information. And we live in an information age. It's so available. And with that comes responsibility. And I'm passionate about this because it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Think about it. What if you posted something that was medical advice, discouraging people to get treatment for a disease that can be deadly? And they saw a lot of other people posting the same thing, so they thought it must be true. And they ignored medical advice and had a bad outcome. The erosion of expertise is dangerous. False claims about cancer treatments really rile me up, and I've witnessed it firsthand. Patients who wanted to try drinking carrot juice instead of following the standard recommendations. And it never worked. But listen, I think carrots are great for you. In fact, I think you should eat a variety of vegetables. A healthy diet promotes good health. But if you need some shelves built in your closet, call a handyman. And if you get a cancer, please trust your doctor. I'm totally serious. I hope I haven't offended you, and I hope you've learned a lot about how to do your own research. And I also hope you appreciate my sense of humor. I want you to share this with your friends and family. Let's get the word out. And definitely eat the carrots. And instead of drinking juice, eat them whole, because whole carrots are naturally healthy, and healthy looks great on you.
The information contained in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered to be a substitute for medical advice. You should continue to follow up with your physician or healthcare provider and take medication as prescribed. Though the information in this podcast is evidence-based, new research may develop and recommendations may change.